I stood beneath the "Arrivals" sign, my coat folded over one arm, the other hand gripping the handle of my suitcase. Around me, the airport bloomed with laughter, children squealing, lovers reuniting, handmade signs shaking in small hands. I had no one waiting. My phone screen was smudged with fingerprints from checking too often. The last message still blinked up at me. "Can't wait to see you. Safe travels, Red Heart. 40 minutes late now." No missed calls. No text. Just that blinking heart, absurd in its cheerfulness. Then the notification buzzed in, louder somehow, crueler. A photo. A long table, candles glowing. My son, his wife, the children, even her parents, all raising glasses. "Home for the holidays." Nothing better, the caption said. I stared. Not just because I wasn't in the frame. There wasn't even an empty chair. No panic. No tears. Just a shift, small but certain. Like the sound of a key turning in a lock. I straightened the collar of my coat and turned toward the doors. Something had ended. Not loudly. But completely. The motel room was clean, if a little too bright. One of those places with stiff towels and soap wrapped in paper like a gift no one really wanted. I sat on the edge of the bed, coat still on, suitcase unopened, and watched the yellow light flicker in the parking lot outside. I wasn't surprised, not really. Not after the last few years. But still, it hurt. Not sharply, but like a bruise you forget about until you brush against it wrong. I had never asked for much. Even as a girl, I was the one who waited my turn, who finished chores before dessert, who made her bed without being asked. My mother used to say I was the kind of child who made parenting feel easy. I wonder now if that was just her way of saying I didn't need too much. Later, I became the kind of wife who filled the pantry before her own closet. The kind of mother who stayed up late sewing hems for school concerts and baked 36 cookies when only one was requested. I didn't do it to earn anything. I did it because love, to me, always looked like work. Quiet, steady work. When my son, Daniel, was born, I felt the world rearrange itself around him. It was as if every sound softened for his sleep, every corner of my life curved toward his needs. I didn't mind. I never did. I took jobs that let me be home after school, waitressing, temp work, even house cleaning. I packed his lunches with notes until 6th grade, when he told me the other kids laughed. After that, I still wrote them, I just slipped them into his backpack where he wouldn't find them until later. I was the scaffolding. The soft layer under everyone else's comfort. Never the portrait on the wall, just the nail holding it up. Daniel's wife, Courtney, came into our lives with a kind of grace I admired at first. She was composed, intelligent, very put together. I tried to make space for her, as any mother should. Gave them privacy. Let them host. Brought wine instead of opinions. But over time, the space I'd made became permanent. The calls grew fewer. The visits shorter. Then came the polite corrections, "Actually, Mom, we do it this way now," and the way Courtney would gently place her hand on Daniel's arm when I spoke too long, a quiet signal I wasn't meant to miss. I chalked it up to transition. They were building their own life. That was good, I told myself. Natural. Healthy. But some things didn't feel natural at all. Like how my birthday dinner always conflicted with one of her work events. Or how Christmas stockings at their place had names embroidered on each, but mine was always just a plain red felt one with no tag. Or how my stories, especially the ones about when Daniel was little, always seemed to be met with indulgent smiles, as if nostalgia were a kind of indulgence they couldn't afford. I had become something to manage. A delicate dish they only served when necessary. Still, I kept giving. I mailed packages for the kids with handmade scarves. I paid for their furnace repair one winter without telling them it was me. I never kept score. I just kept showing up. So when they invited me for the holidays this year, I packed early. I bought a new blouse. I wrapped presents with ribbons, made cookies from the recipe my mother taught me. And when Daniel sent the message, "Can't wait to see you," I believed it. I even offered to take a cab from the airport. "Don't bother with the drive," I'd said. "I don't mind waiting." But I did mind, it turns out. I minded the waiting. And I minded the photo. The chairs all full. The glasses raised. The caption that said "Home, without me." That was the moment something old inside me shifted. Not broken. Just moved. Like a drawer that finally sticks closed after years of sliding open too easily. At the motel, I opened my notebook and wrote in a hand steadied by something deeper than sadness. I am not a spare. I am not a relic. I am not the help. Then I underlined the words slowly, twice, just to see them hold their shape. Outside, a child screamed joyfully in the hallway. Probably dragging a suitcase twice his size. I didn't flinch. I just listened. That night, I ate the cookies I'd baked. Not all of them, just the best ones, the ones with the raspberry jam in the center. I poured a small cup of wine from a bottle I'd tucked in my suitcase. I toasted to no one. And I slept with the light off, the door locked, the phone face down. Tomorrow, I'd return home. And when I did, things would be different. Not louder. Not bitter. Just clearer. The morning I checked out of the motel, the woman at the front desk handed me a mint with my receipt. "Hope you had a restful stay," she said, with a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. I nodded, tucked the mint into my pocket, and walked out into the gray light of the parking lot. The sky felt low, like it might rain or say something. The drive home was quiet. No radio. Just the hum of tires and the steady rhythm of thought. I passed fields stiff with frost, empty swings in schoolyards, one lone dog pacing the edge of a fence like it had forgotten what it was looking for. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was already leaning west. The porch light hadn't been set to turn on. No one was waiting. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and breathed in the stillness of my own home. No voices. No smells of food. No coats hung in the hallway. Just me. I set my bag down and walked through the house slowly. Touched the arm of the couch, the handle of the stove, the banister worn smooth by years of Daniel's small hands. Everything felt suspended. Not sad, just still. I made tea, then sat at the table in my kitchen. The table where I used to braid Courtney's hair before dinner. The table where Daniel once cried over a college rejection letter, and I told him, "One no isn't the end." I sipped slowly and let the truth settle the way dust does, silently, everywhere. They didn't forget me. They excluded me. There's a difference, and it changes everything. It wasn't an accident. Not some harmless slip of memory. It was planned. A gathering arranged without my name in the count, a table set without a chair for me. Because it was easier. Because convenience wears a smile and says, "Maybe next year." I thought back, further than the photo. The Thanksgiving I spent baking while they drove 2 hours to Courtney's mother's lake house. The Mother's Day card that came without a signature, just a typed message, no handwriting. The time I offered to help with the kids' birthday party and was told, "It's already covered, but thank you." And then, the silences. The ones that fill space like fog, thick and unspoken. The texts left on read. The voicemails never returned. The growing sense that my usefulness had expired. It wasn't out of cruelty. That's the trick of it. Cruelty would have given me something to name. Something to push back against. But this was softer. This was careful forgetting. This was, we thought it would be simpler. They didn't mean to hurt me. But they never meant to include me either. I thought of Daniel, how he used to call me his best friend in grade school. How he'd climb into my bed during thunderstorms and press his cold feet against my legs until I yelped. How, after his first heartbreak, he lay on the kitchen floor for 2 hours while I read to him from a book about birds. Do they stay with their mates? He'd asked. Some do, I said. The smart ones. I had given him everything. Not because I was keeping a tally, but because that's what love looked like to me. It looked like showing up. Again and again. Without question. And now I had become background. A seasonal presence. The one who brings the green bean casserole but not the conversation. I opened my old notebook again. Not the one I traveled with, but the one I kept in a drawer beneath the tablecloths. A long ledger of lists, old recipes, measurements of curtains long replaced. And I turned to a fresh page. I wrote. What I know now. They see me only when I'm useful. My presence is not their priority. I am no longer part of their plans, only their past. I paused. Then added. This is not my fault. I underlined that last one 3 times, slowly, until the ink began to feather through the page. It wasn't bitterness. Not yet. It was clarity. That night, I did not cry. I folded laundry, reheated soup, and brushed my hair longer than usual. I let silence do what it does best, reveal what noise conceals. Before bed, I walked through the house and turned off every light. Not because I was hiding. But because I was conserving. There was nothing left to give to a family that only showed up when there was something to take. I went to bed early. I slept with both windows cracked, letting in the cold. The house creaked and settled around me like an old friend learning to exhale. Tomorrow, I'd begin again. Not with vengeance. But with precision. The morning light filtered through the curtains pale and thin, as if it, too, were uncertain of its place. I woke without an alarm, without urgency. There was nowhere I had to be. No one expecting me. The kind of morning that used to feel like luxury. Now, it felt like aftermath. I made coffee. Not the instant kind Daniel always teased me for keeping, but the good beans, the ones I used to bring out only when company came. I ground them by hand, slowly. The quiet rasp of the grinder felt like something sacred. I drank it black, standing at the kitchen window. The lawn was pale with frost. The world had not ended, though something inside me had clearly changed. I dressed carefully. Soft slacks, a warm cardigan. Clothes I had not worn in months. Not because they weren't comfortable, but because they made me feel like myself, and I had not needed that in a while. I left the dishes in the sink. I locked the front door, then walked to the bank. It was a small branch, familiar faces behind glass. I asked to speak with the manager, and when she greeted me with polite surprise, I nodded once and said, I'd like to make some changes to my accounts. We sat in a small room with a glass table and no clock. I explained what I wanted. She listened, then leaned forward gently. May I ask why, Mrs. Reardon? No, I said. But thank you for asking. She didn't push. I signed the forms. By the time I left, the automatic payments were gone. The quiet streams of money that had flowed each month toward Daniel and Courtney's household, cell phone coverage, car insurance, the grocery debit card tied to my checking, cut off. Not maliciously. Just, ended. I kept the donations. The ones I made monthly to the shelter and the library and the food pantry. Love still deserved to stay. But love wasn't going to bankroll convenience anymore. On the walk back, I passed the stationery store and paused. Inside, I bought a new notebook, leather-bound, with a deep red cover. Not for grocery lists. Not for reminders. This one was for truth. At home, I placed it beside the phone. Then I picked up the other receiver, my landline, the one I kept in the study for calls that mattered, and dialed my attorney. "Lydia," I said when she picked up, "I need to make adjustments to my estate plan." She was quiet for a moment. "What's prompted this?" "Clarity," I said. We scheduled a time. I already knew what I wanted. That evening, I opened the old wooden box in the hallway closet, the one where I kept cards from the grandchildren, drawings, old notes. I took out each folded scrap of paper, each smudged crayon line, and reread them in silence. Then I reached the one from Jessie. My only granddaughter who called just to say hi. Who asked how I was sleeping. Who once sent me a necklace she'd made from string and a button and wrote, "For when you miss me. I miss you always." I set that card beside the new notebook. When Lydia arrived the next morning, briefcase in hand, I was ready. We sat at the dining table. She pulled out forms. I handed her my notes. "I want it all to go to Jessie," I said. "The house?" she asked. "Yes. The house. And the savings. Everything. Not even a small portion to your son." I looked at her steadily. "No." She nodded once, not surprised. "Shall I draft it clean?" "Clean," I said. We signed the new documents. The old ones I watched her fold, stamp void across, and tuck away. "Would you like them destroyed?" she asked. "No. I want them kept. Quietly. Just in case someone ever doubts I meant what I said." By the time she left, I felt lighter. Not free. Not yet. But aligned. That evening, I cooked a small meal for myself, rice, lentils, sautéed spinach. I lit a candle anyway. No guests. No company. Just me, and the light I chose for myself. Then, at the kitchen table, I opened the red notebook and wrote. What I control. My name. My home. My will. My quiet. My final say. I paused. Then added. What I release. The need to be chosen. The illusion of obligation. The ache of always waiting. No one would clap for this. There would be no applause for quiet boundary setting. But that wasn't the point. The point was this: I was no longer feeding a system that fed on me. I washed the dish by hand, dried it with the soft towel Daniel gave me 10 years ago, back when he still brought gifts without occasion. And when the phone rang that night, just once, no voicemail, I let it go. 3 days later, I stood in the hallway with a basket of mail that had piled up while I was away. Catalogs. Credit card offers. A glossy holiday flyer from a department store I hadn't shopped at in years. Nothing personal. Nothing with a real hand behind it. I set it all down and reached for the one envelope that mattered, the one addressed to me in Jessie's handwriting. Thick paper. A stamp chosen for beauty, not bulk mail efficiency. Inside was a card with pressed flowers on the front, and in the center, just 3 words. Thinking of you. No pretense. No holiday schedule. No guilt hidden behind cheer. I held that card to my chest and sat at the kitchen table, where the candle from the night before had burned down to a quiet stump. I didn't cry. There was no sorrow left to spill. Just a feeling like calm after a storm. Then I pulled out the folder from Lydia. It was time to finalize everything. The amendments to my estate were done. The new will, executed, witnessed, notarized, left no ambiguity. Jessie was the sole beneficiary. She didn't know. She didn't need to. The gesture wasn't about reward. It was about recognition. I placed the documents in the fireproof box with the deed, the savings records, and the trust statement. The key, I hung on a hook inside the pantry door, behind a tin labeled cloves, a place no one but me would look. The next morning, I returned to the bank. The teller smiled with polite warmth. "I need to remove a linked card from my account," I said. She tapped her keyboard, then asked, "Name on the card?" "Courtney Reardon." A brief silence. "Of course," she said. The cancellation took under a minute. So clean. So final. I watched the screen refresh. Linked account, terminated. Courtney wouldn't get a notification. Not right away. But the next time she tried to pay for groceries or gas with the card I'd quietly funded for 5 years, it would blink red. Declined. She'd check the balance and see only a message, account closed by primary holder. And that primary holder was me. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. Bought 1 sheet of stamps, gold foil, with pine trees. I addressed a single envelope. Inside, I placed a copy of the utility bill, one I had paid automatically for years. On it, I wrote in blue ink. "You'll need to transfer this to your own name." No signature. No explanation. Just the truth, plain and clean. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of my house with a notepad. Took inventory. The back gate needed mending. The rose bush had died in the frost. I made a list, not for anyone else, but because I was staying. This was still my home. I opened the attic and retrieved the box of winter coats, ones I used to keep, just in case guests came. I sorted them into 2 piles, one for the church drive, the other to take to the shelter downtown. Then I opened the hallway closet and found the sweater Courtney once said made me look too grandmotherly. It was wool, soft, a rich plum color. I wore it that evening while I read on the porch with a thermos of cider. No one drove by. No one waved. And I didn't mind. That night, the phone rang twice. I didn't answer. The voicemail came through a minute later, Daniel's voice, light but unsure. "Hey Mom, just saw a few account issues come up. I think maybe there's a tech error with the utilities. Courtney says her card was declined, which? I don't know. Maybe fraud. Anyway, just let me know. Love you." No panic yet. Just confusion. I let the message sit. The next morning, a second one came. "Hi again. Could you call me? I think maybe the account's frozen or something. We had trouble checking out at the store, and Courtney's pretty upset." I smiled without humor. That evening, the third call came, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. "Mrs. Reardon." A strained voice. "Courtney." Polished edges turned sharp. "Yes. Hi. I'm just a little confused. I think there's been a mistake with the accounts. I mean, maybe the autopay disconnected or something." "No mistake," I said gently. A pause. "I see. So, you did that on purpose?" "Yes." Another silence. Then, "But we had an arrangement." "No. You had expectations." She exhaled, tight and fast. "Daniel's very upset. I imagine he is. I don't think you understand what this does to us." "I do." A longer pause. I could hear her breathing, sharp, uneven. "I don't know what's changed," she finally said, voice trembling now. "I do," I said. And I hung up. I didn't feel proud. I felt precise. Afterward, I made tea. Chamomile. I opened the red notebook and wrote. "Today, I reclaimed my finances. My name. My role as the author of my life. No fanfare. No announcement. Just clarity, like a bell rung once in a quiet room. The silence afterward was mine. It began, as these things often do, with emojis. A flurry of them, smiley faces, question marks, a heart. As if the right sequence of symbols might smooth over what words could not. Daniel's texts arrived in bursts. Hey mom, smiling face with smiling eyes, everything okay? Speech balloon, haven't heard from you, red heart, just checking in. Telephone receiver. I didn't reply. Not to the first message. Not to the second, which came 3 hours later with a hint more urgency. By that evening, the voice messages started. Daniel's voice, low and quick, as though he were speaking through clenched teeth in the next room, trying not to wake the children. Mom, Courtney's upset. We're all a little confused. I know things have been strange lately, but can we please talk? Strange. That's what he called what I did. Strange. The next morning, the texts changed tone. Where are you? We're worried. I almost laughed. Where was I? Where had I been when they toasted over roasted duck and cranberry glaze, cameras flashing, Courtney's arm looped around his like they were holding on to more than each other? Where was I when they planned dinners and birthdays and vacations and chose silence over presents? Where was I when the seat at their table stayed empty, and no one noticed? The answer was simple: here. I had always been here. It was they who had vanished. Then, mid-morning, came the knock. Not a hurried bang or a friendly tap. A single, firm knock. The kind that says, I came to settle something. I opened the door and there she was. Courtney. Hair swept into a careful bun, coat cinched tight, scarf draped with intention. She smelled like cold air and expensive soap. Her face was composed, but I saw the rehearsal in it. This was not an unplanned visit. I stepped back, but only slightly. You didn't call. I thought it would be better to come. Why now? She blinked. We've noticed some changes. I imagine you have. She crossed the threshold with the authority of someone who believes she still owns the room. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, her gaze scanning the kitchen as if cataloging damage. I think we've had a misunderstanding, she said, perching on the edge of a chair uninvited. Daniel's been very upset. He's resilient, I said. A flicker passed over her face. Discomfort. Confusion. Control slipping. She leaned forward, folding her hands like a therapist with a difficult client. We've always appreciated everything you've done. Truly. But there are ways to go about things. Conversations. Compromise. I was never asked for compromise, I said. Only compliance. She exhaled sharply through her nose, a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. I just think maybe you're reacting emotionally. Is there another way to react to being erased? She tilted her head. No one erased you. There was no chair for me at the table. Her mouth opened. Closed. She chose not to dispute the photo. Silence bloomed between us. You've been under strain, she said finally, choosing her words with the care of someone crossing thin ice. We know grief does strange things. But you have to understand, Daniel needs stability. I raised an eyebrow. And you think I don't? Courtney straightened. The mask flickered again. This time it didn't quite settle. We're family, she said. I nodded slowly. When it's convenient. She looked toward the kitchen window, as if expecting someone, maybe Daniel, to walk in and rescue her. But the house was still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, and the ticking of the old clock Noelle had fixed with a nail and patience. Look, she said, and now her voice dropped into something closer to its real shape. You've made your point. But this can't go on. You're hurting Daniel. And the kids. The kids? I asked. Or the comfort of pretending nothing was ever taken from me. She stood then, brushing invisible lint from her coat. Fine, she said. If this is how you want it. It's not what I want, I said, rising to meet her gaze. It's what I've chosen. There's a difference. For a moment, we stood eye to eye, two women who had both mastered the art of smiling while being dismissed. But today, only one of us wore that smile. The house felt different with her inside it. Not hostile. Just immune. The walls held too much of my memory to bend toward her presence. The photos on the mantel, some taken decades ago, some recent, watched her with a kind of neutrality she could not penetrate. Daniel will be in touch, she said stiffly. I imagine he will. She moved toward the door. I didn't follow. I let the silence walk her out. When the door closed behind her, I did not lock it immediately. I just stood there, breathing in the air she'd left behind. Then I turned the latch with a soft, deliberate click. Later that night, I lit another candle. Not for ritual. Not for mourning. For presence. I wrote in my red notebook. What I will no longer do. Explain my boundaries. Soften my decisions for comfort. Apologize for noticing what was done to me. And beneath that, I added. What they lost. An ally. A quiet giver. The benefit of my silence. They hadn't expected a reckoning to arrive without drama. But here it was. No raised voices. No accusations. Just absence. And absence, when intentional, speaks louder than presence ever could. That night, I set the table for one. Not as an act of loneliness, but of intention. A plate, a cloth napkin, the good fork. A small vase with a single stem of rosemary from the garden, still green, still fragrant, even in winter. I made soup from scratch. Carrots, lentils, thyme. I stirred slowly, letting the steam curl around me like memory. Outside, the wind pressed against the window panes, but the house held firm. After dinner, I lit a candle, not in mourning, not in memory, but in recognition. A marker of presence. Of being here, still. Then I poured tea and sat by the fire with the red notebook in my lap. The pages were nearly full now, each one a small reclamation. I opened to the final page and wrote 2 lists. What I no longer owe. Explanations. Second chances. Apologies for taking up space. What I still have. My name. My peace. My home. My granddaughter's voice. Myself. I stared at the last word until the letters softened and shimmered in the firelight. Myself. It was not revenge I had built. It was a refuge. Not just from their absence, but from my own erasure. And the outcome was not triumph. It was balance. Just then, a sound, soft, hesitant, on the front steps. I rose and opened the door. There stood Jessie, her cheeks pink from the cold, a bag slung over her shoulder. I didn't know if you'd want company, she said. But I brought backgammon. I stepped aside. She kicked off her boots and handed me a package, a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was a tiny jar of jam. I made it at school, she said. It's blackberry. Like the ones you used to pick with me. I nodded, throat tight, hands trembling, not from age, but from being seen. We played 2 rounds. She won the first. I let her think it was skill. Later, when the fire burned low and she dozed on the couch with my old quilt over her lap, I whispered it into the quiet. I'm still here. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned.